Sold! Here are the keys to your new home. New beginnings sound exciting. From a new marriage to a new home, having access to legal help comes in handy. With Legal Shield, you can connect with a designated law firm that knows your state laws, helping with prenups, real estate contracts, and even wills and estate planning, starting around $1 a day. Legal Shield. Real lawyers, really affordable. For 10% off your annual subscription, sign up at LegalShield.com today. That's LegalShield.com. Legal Shield does not provide legal representation or advice. See a plan for complete terms.
To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
Some killers leave behind a trail of forensic evidence. Others do everything they can to erase it. On the morning of January 4th, 2001, Seattle area real estate agent Mike Emert left to meet a prospective homebuyer for what should have been a routine property showing. But just 1 hour later, the homeowner returned to find the front door open, water running upstairs, and a trail of blood leading to the bathroom. There, inside the bathtub, was Mike's body. He had been stabbed 19 times while the shower continued to run over him. To investigators, the scene looked deliberate. The secluded home, the running water, and the missing buyer all suggested this wasn't a crime of opportunity. It appeared someone had carefully planned the murder and then tried to wash away every forensic trace they left behind. But as detectives searched for the man who called himself Steven, they uncovered an even bigger mystery. Who was he? And more importantly, who wanted Mike Emert dead? This is Forensic Tales, episode 344, The Murder of Mike Emert. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show. If you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. For most of us, buying a home is an exciting milestone. But for the real estate agent showing that home, every appointment comes with a level of trust. Agents routinely meet complete strangers, often alone in vacant houses located far from neighbors or busy streets. And they don't always know who's walking through the front door or what their true intentions might be. While the vast majority of those meetings end without incident, the profession has long recognized that showing homes can carry very real safety risks. Workplace violence has claimed the lives of real estate professionals across the country, prompting many brokerages to implement safety protocols that simply didn't exist decades ago. But on January 4th, 2001, those risks became a horrifying reality for one successful Seattle area realtor. On the morning of January 3rd, 2001, Mike met with a client in the parking lot of the Kirkland Park Place shopping mall, a suburb east of Seattle, Washington. The client had contacted Mike directly a few days earlier, saying he wanted to look into buying a home in the East Side area near Woodinville. There was one home in particular in the 19,500 block of 157th Place Northeast that had caught his attention, which was listed for just under $600,000. It was a modern brick and beige 3-story home on a very private, secluded lot. So Mike and the client met in the shopping center parking lot, then drove together to see the house in person. And everything seemed to go well. The client really liked the home, and Mike was excited about the potential sale. So after the showing wrapped up, Mike and the client drove back to the parking lot, shook hands, said their goodbyes, and agreed to meet again the following day to take a second look at the place. Later that night, Mike talked with his wife and a few other coworkers about the client. He described him as a little odd, and he walked with a limp and carried a cane. He said the guy looked like he was in his early 50s and spoke with some kind of East Coast accent. When Mike's wife, Mary Beth, asked him what had brought this guy to Seattle, Mike said he had told him he had just moved from California and was staying with friends, so he needed a place to permanently stay. He also seemed to suggest that he was coming into a large amount of money, maybe some kind of inheritance, so he could afford the home. For someone like Mike, who was an experienced and successful real estate agent, he probably didn't think too much about it. He said the guy was a little odd and told another coworker he was a weird dude, but that can happen anytime you work with the general public. It was also a little strange that the two of them met in a parking lot and drove to the house together. Usually, a realtor and a potential buyer or seller meet at the property, not at a third location. But after hearing Mike's plans, Mary Beth didn't give the appointment another thought. She had no way of knowing he had just told her where he was going to die. The following day, Thursday, January 4th, 2001, Mike got up and dressed for work just like Mary Beth, who also worked in real estate. And when he got into the office, he told a coworker he was scheduled to meet with the weird dude later that morning, but didn't go into any more detail. In his work planner, he wrote down the client's name as Steven, which is how I'll refer to him throughout the rest of the episode. Just like the day before, Mike and Steven met in the parking lot of the Kirkland Park Place shopping mall at around 11:30. Then after that, they headed to the property they had viewed the day before, driving together in Mike's black 2000 Cadillac Escalade. That was the last time he'd ever be seen alive. About an hour later, around 12:30, the home's owner, Gail Garland, stopped by the house on her lunch break from work. She knew a potential buyer was coming to see the place a little earlier, but thought they'd be long gone by then. So she parked her car in the garage and entered the home, but immediately saw something that caught her attention. The front door was open. As she began walking toward it, another thing caught her attention. She could hear the sound of running water coming from upstairs, but she didn't think anyone was there, since when she pulled up, she didn't see any other cars parked outside. She then began to make her way upstairs, completely unaware of what she was about to walk into. As she climbed the steps to the second floor, Gail saw a trail of blood leading into one of the bathrooms. Her first big forensic clue that something was really, really wrong. Then, as soon as she opened the bathroom door, she saw Mike's badly bruised and bloody body floating face down in the bathtub. The shower and sinks were still running, explaining the sound of rushing water she had heard just moments earlier, and it was immediately clear that Mike was dead. Michael Angelo Emert was born Michelangelo Locati on November 13, 1960. But when his parents divorced when he was just 6 years old, he started going by his mother's maiden name, Emert. Washington had always been his home. That's where he grew up and even attended Washington State University in Pullman. For the first years after graduation, he owned and operated a company called Superior Seed. But sometime in the 1980s, he grew inspired by his uncle's success in real estate and decided to switch careers. So in 1991, he started working for Windermere Real Estate. Not only had he discovered a career that he was passionate about, but it also led him to find the love of his life. In the mid-1990s, Mike met Mary Beth, who also worked in real estate, and from the moment they met, they hit it off and started dating. Then by 1996, they were married, marking the beginning of what was supposed to be a long, healthy life together. Mary Beth had a daughter from a previous relationship named Lauren, who would become Mike's stepdaughter. And by all accounts, he really embraced this new role and treated Lauren as if she were his own. Sometime after getting married, Mike, Mary Beth, and Lauren moved to Redmond, a city about 15 miles east of Seattle, and they truly had it all. They were inseparable soulmates and very successful real estate agents in the competitive Seattle market, which was booming thanks to tech startups and a thriving economy at the time. There just didn't seem to be anyone who disliked Mike, either personally or professionally. Friends described him as kind, easygoing, and genuinely well-liked, while clients trusted him enough to make him one of the area's most respected real estate agents. He had even been named Realtor of the Year in both 1998 and 1999, which has to make you wonder, if Mike seemed to have no enemies, then who would want him dead badly enough to orchestrate such a calculated murder? His murder became the first homicide in the city of Woodinville since 1997, so the King County Sheriff's Office was called in to assist from the very beginning. Investigators weren't walking into an ordinary homicide. They were about to process a crime scene filled with clues, contradictions, and signs that someone had gone to great lengths to eliminate forensic evidence. Detectives believe that Mike had to be murdered by this Stephen guy. They believe that while Mike showed him around the house, Stephen lured him to the upstairs bedroom, where he was first struck from behind. The blow either knocked him unconscious or very close to it, and from there, Stephen launched a brutal and savage attack on him. In total, Mike had been stabbed 19 times with what investigators initially thought was some type of long knife. We'll talk more about that a little later in the episode. Stephen then dragged Mike's body about 18 feet from the bedroom to the bathroom, where he was ultimately found by the homeowner. Stephen had lifted Mike's body up into the bathtub and turned on the shower along with both of the nearby sinks. And here's where things get messy when it comes to the forensic evidence.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Why spend thousands on a basic will when you can get access to legal help for around $1 a day? With Legal Shield, you can put a full estate plan in place, including a will, health directives, and powers of attorney to help protect your family and hard-earned assets. Sign up today at LegalShield.com and get 10% off our annual plans. It's finally simple and affordable. Legal Shield. Real lawyers, really affordable. Sign up at LegalShield.com. That's LegalShield.com. Legal Shield does not provide legal representation or advice. See a plan for complete terms.
Water is incredibly problematic for crime scenes. It can wash away valuable evidence within a matter of seconds. And that's exactly what happened here. When Mike's body was sent for an autopsy and a full forensic examination, the only genetic material they found belonged to him. They also had the same result inside the bathroom and around the shower. So the killer must have known a thing or two about getting rid of forensic evidence, not only from Mike's body, but also from his own. many people believe, myself included, that the reason why the bathroom sinks were running was that the killer used them to clean and wash away any evidence he might have had on him. Another strange detail from the crime scene was that Mike's wallet, cell phone, car keys, wristwatch, and wedding ring were all nowhere to be found. The reason this was strange was that although most of these items were expensive, especially his watch and wedding ring, which were valued at over $3,000, the police never considered the motive to be a robbery. In fact, the more they learned from the crime, the more they started to suspect Mike was murdered over something far more personal than simply a nice gold watch. Later that day, Mike's car was found abandoned at the Kirkland Park Place shopping center, where he and the mystery client had met earlier. And this is where things get really interesting when it comes to forensic evidence. Unlike the house, the police recovered skin cells and blood inside the Cadillac Escalade that didn't belong to Mike or anyone close to him, including his wife. And all of that tracks with what detectives believe happened. They think the killer had driven Mike's car to the shopping center after the murder before abandoning it. And while the crime scene inside the house appeared to have been meticulously cleaned in an effort to destroy forensic evidence, the suspect may have overlooked one critical detail, unintentionally leaving behind his own biological evidence inside the vehicle. Later that year, the samples were sent to the FBI for forensic analysis. More on that a little later. Mike's wife, Mary Beth, was driving when she got the call from her mother, who was also a realtor, and learned about the murder. The realization that he was gone started to sink in while I was still on the telephone with my mom, but still hoping that, maybe he was alive and maybe they were wrong, Maybe it wasn't Mike, and I think it was just shock and disbelief. About 24 hours after Mike was murdered, his wallet was discovered on top of a payphone at the Coleman Docks, also known as Pier 52, which is a ferry terminal. But noticeably missing was his debit card, which had been used sometime after the killing. Then, a few weeks later, they found his cell phone. But even all of these years later, the police have refused to say where or how they recovered it. All we know is that just like his debit card, his cell phone was used to make several outgoing calls sometime after his murder. But beyond that, we don't have any other details about it, like who the police think made the phone calls or to whom they were made. But Mike's expensive wedding ring and watch were never found. In a case as brutal as this, and in a city unaccustomed to homicides, it quickly became an all-hands-on-deck investigation. Detectives worked around the clock, and as news of Mike's murder spread, tips began pouring in from the public. And before long, investigators had their first promising lead. They received a call about a homeless man who often hung around the shopping center where Mike and this Steven guy met. And not only did this guy match Steven's physical description, but he also walked with a cane and had a limp, exactly how Mike described the client to his wife and coworkers. So for investigators, this seemed like a very promising tip. The man was identified as Jeffrey John Solo, a Vietnam War veteran in his 60s and a father of 4. One of his children being arguably one of the greatest female goalkeepers in soccer history, Hope Solo. When questioned by detectives, Jeffrey admitted to being a criminal, mostly concerning fraud, but said he wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He even admitted to using women in the past, oftentimes posing as a potential home buyer to meet female realtors. But the forensic evidence didn't match. After submitting a blood sample, he was officially cleared as a suspect in March of 2001. So, as good a suspect as he initially appeared to be, it didn't line up with the forensics. and in 2007, he passed away from a heart attack. Over the next several months, King County Sheriff's investigators conducted an exhaustive search of Mike's finances and looked into every single one of his family members, friends, and coworkers. Everything about the murder screamed that this was over something personal. Nothing suggested it was random. So the police needed to find out whether there was anyone in Mike's life with a motive to want to harm him. But that line of thinking turned into a dead end. Here's what John Holland, a detective for the King County Sheriff's Office, said about that in a public statement. While conducting hundreds of interviews with people, even going back 10 years ago, and a prior business that he was involved in, we have not interviewed anybody that can establish why somebody would want to have Mike Emert killed. Everything I said about Mike at the top of the episode is true. He didn't have a single enemy. Everyone loved him both professionally and personally. So it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that the police didn't identify anyone from his inner circle. But as that theory fell apart, another one began to take shape. One that suggested Mike hadn't been murdered by someone who knew him personally at all. One theory that's been thrown around over the years is that this was a professional hit. And here's why that theory makes sense. Number one, the client posing as Steven used a payphone to call Mike directly to set up the house showing. He also never spoke to any of Mike's coworkers or fellow real estate agents. He contacted him directly through anonymous payphones. Number two, the police suspect that the particular house he was interested in was specifically targeted because of its remote location. It was very isolated and not very visible from the other houses on the block, so the killer knew no one would see him as they pulled up to view it. And number three, the meticulous crime scene cleanup. Whoever the killer was went to great lengths to get rid of any and all forensic evidence that could potentially identify him. That's usually the work of an experienced killer, not someone who is brand new to the game of murder. When it comes to the limp and use of a cane, the police now believe that was a lie, all in an attempt to cover up his real identity. And from a psychological standpoint, the limp probably gave Mike a false sense of security. You also have to keep in mind who Mike was. He wasn't some small, frail guy. He was about 6 feet tall and weighed over 180 pounds. So it's hard to believe that a man who genuinely relied on a cane and walked with a significant limp could have overpowered Mike in a violent struggle. Let's not forget that the killer stabbed him 19 times, dragged his body into the bathroom, and lifted him into the bathtub before turning on the water. That would have required a tremendous amount of strength and control. So to detectives, it suggested one thing. The limp and cane weren't signs of a disability at all. They were likely part of an elaborate disguise, allowing the killer to appear vulnerable while hiding what he was truly capable of. Much earlier in the episode, we talked about the long knife that had been used to stab Mike, but that's arguably another important forensic clue. Years later, detectives revealed that the murder weapon, never recovered from the scene, might not have been a knife at all. Based on the nature of Mike's injuries, they believed it could have been a sword or another long, narrow blade. That led investigators to another scary idea. What if the cane the killer carried wasn't simply part of his disguise? What if it had actually been used to conceal the murder weapon? A sword cane would have allowed the suspect to walk into the home carrying a deadly weapon in plain sight without raising suspicion. Here's another quote from one of the detectives about that. "I think it's possible that the weapon was this cane, and the cane might have been one of these sword canes or a cane with a knife in it. So maybe the initial blitz assault to stun Mike was striking Mike with the cane from behind. The knife portion of the cane was used to kill Mike. Mike was nearly 6 feet tall, weighed 187 pounds. I think we have an offender here that was able to overcome a man of Mike's stature and then drag his body perhaps about 18 feet from one room to where he came to rest. The water in the shower was turned on, and the 2 faucets in the vanity sinks were found running. That, to me, speaks of an attempt to get rid of any trace evidence. Hairs, fibers, things like that would be washed down the drain. He's cleaning his hands off in the sink, cleaning the weapon off in the sink. This was probably not this individual's first murder, or certainly not his first violent assault. For the first several months of the investigation, 10 King County investigators worked on the case, but eventually many were reassigned. And a $50,000 reward was offered for any information leading to an arrest. The money had been raised by several local real estate agents in the Washington area. Mike's murder sent shockwaves through the real estate community. Agents suddenly realized that one of the most routine parts of their job, meeting a prospective buyer at a vacant home, could also be one of the most dangerous. And many began changing the way they conducted showings, taking extra precautions and paying closer attention to who they were meeting. And sadly, Mike's case wouldn't be the last time a real estate agent would be targeted in such a brutal way while simply doing their job. A lot about this case reminds me of the 2008 unsolved murder of Lindsay Buziak, a young female real estate agent who was also murdered while showing a property to prospective buyers in Canada. This is actually a story we covered in a very early episode of the show and on my other podcast about unsolved murders, Find My Killer. But in that case, Lindsay had received a call from a client several days before her murder, asking to see a $1 million house in the area. But when she met the prospective buyers at the property, she was stabbed multiple times and died inside one of the bedrooms. And just like in Mike's case, she didn't show any defensive wounds, suggesting she was caught off guard while showing the property. And just like with Mike, Lindsay's murder is still unsolved. Mike's murder changed the real estate industry in Washington forever. In the months that followed, the Washington State Real Estate Safety Council was established, bringing together real estate organizations and law enforcement with one goal: making sure another agent never lost their life simply for showing a home. The council encouraged brokerages to adopt much stricter safety protocols. Instead of meeting prospective buyers at a property, agents were urged to meet them at the office first, verify their identity by copying a driver's license or holding onto a set of car keys during showings, and let coworkers know exactly where they were going and who they were meeting. Many agents also stopped showing vacant homes alone altogether, choosing to bring another agent or use a buddy system whenever possible. Those safety measures may have helped protect future agents, but they did nothing to solve Mike's murder. And nearly a decade later, investigators were still searching for the man who killed him, until an unexpected break came from the forensic evidence. In March of 2010, a Kirkland area orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Craig McAllister was returning home after picking up his son from the airport when they were attacked by 2 masked men. The men wanted to get inside the house where Dr. McAllister's wife and daughter were. But the doctor fought back, allowing his son to run across the street to the neighbor's house to get help. And during the struggle, Dr. McAllister was able to rip the ski mask off one of the perpetrators. But before the cops showed up, the 2 men ran away. When the ski mask was sent for forensic testing, the results pointed to 2 men, John Allen Bradshaw and Gary Krueger. John Allen Bradshaw was in his 60s and had been convicted in 2001 for arson and money laundering. And a quick background check revealed that he had previously lived at home owned by Gary Krueger, a 62-year-old former police officer who had been in and out of jail multiple times for bank robbery, and whose DNA was also found on the ski mask. But when the police tried to track both men down, they couldn't find either one of them. In fact, just 1 week later, the police learned that Gary's wife had filed a missing person report saying he was completely broke and desperate. So detectives began wondering whether the men had targeted the McAllister home to score quick cash. For the next 6 months, Gary Krueger and John Allen Bradshaw remained prime suspects in the failed home invasion. But just when you think this story can't get any weirder, there was a massive discovery in September of that year.
Why spend thousands on a basic will when you can get access to legal help for around $1 a day? With Legal Shield, you can put a full estate plan in place, including a will, health directives, and powers of attorney to help protect your family and hard-earned assets. Sign up today at LegalShield.com and get 10% off our annual plans. It's finally simple and affordable. Legal Shield. Real lawyers, really affordable. Sign up at LegalShield.com. That's LegalShield.com. Legal Shield does not provide legal representation or advice. See a plan for complete terms.
In September of 2010, Gary's body was found floating in Lake Washington, and right there next to him was a capsized boat that the police believe he used to try to evade arrest for his involvement in the attempted home invasion. It was a boat he had stolen from his neighbor that very same night. Inside the boat, detectives recovered a duffel bag containing hand restraints, duct tape, and ammunition, which they believed belonged to the same kind of guns he and John Allen Bradshaw had on the night of the home invasion. But the bag only raised more questions. If this were a simple robbery or home invasion, why would they have hand restraints and duct tape? Those items seemed to suggest they had something much more sinister planned that night. From the fall of 2010 through 2016, the police continued to search for John Allen Bradshaw, but he was never found. At this point, most people assume he died in Lake Washington with Gary, but no one's been able to find his body yet. Then, in 2016, King County officials finally released a statement about the case, saying they believed the motive wasn't robbery as they had initially thought. Instead, the motive was something far crazier. Dr. McAllister was targeted that night because he wouldn't perform a free knee replacement on Gary's wife, Betty. So instead of figuring out how to pay for this medical procedure, Gary and his former tenant devised a plan to get back at the doctor and his family. Gary may have disappeared beneath the waters of Lake Washington, but he couldn't take the forensic evidence with him. About a year later, that evidence would begin telling investigators what might have happened to Mike Emert. In September 2011, more than a decade after Mike's murder, his wife Mary Beth got a call from detectives saying they thought they might have gotten a hit on the unknown DNA found inside Mike's Cadillac Escalade. If you recall from earlier in the episode, that was the only piece of forensic evidence they had. So if there was any chance at identifying the killer, this was it. The DNA had been at the FBI's crime lab since 2001, but identifying it took years, not because it couldn't be developed, but because there was nothing to compare it against. And here's how this ties back to the McAllister home invasion and Gary Krueger. Gary Krueger was required to provide a blood sample after being paroled in 2004. But for reasons that remain unclear, it wasn't collected until 2007. And even then, the sample sat in a backlog for another 4 years before finally being uploaded and compared against forensic evidence from unsolved cases. And when that comparison was finally made, investigators got their answer. The trace evidence from Mike Emert's Escalade matched Gary Krueger. But there was one major problem. By the time Mary Beth got that phone call about the testing, Gary Krueger had already been dead for more than a year. So detectives never had the opportunity to sit down with him and ask the questions that mattered most. Why was his DNA inside Mike's Escalade? What role did he play in the murder? And perhaps, most importantly, who wanted Mike dead? With no confession to rely on, investigators did what they do best. They followed the evidence. They combed through every aspect of Gary's background, including his years in law enforcement, his brief career in real estate, his business dealings, and the people he had associated with over the years. And at first, detectives wondered if they would uncover a direct connection between Gary and Mike that had somehow been overlooked. But they didn't find anything. Instead, what they found pointed them back to the same theory they had been developing almost since the beginning of the investigation. Mike hadn't been killed because of a personal grudge. He hadn't been targeted over a business dispute. If anything, the evidence increasingly suggested that Gary Krueger wasn't the reason Mike was murdered. He was simply the man hired to do it. In 1981, a former police officer named Terry Dolan was shot and killed outside the gas station he owned in Everett, Washington. Initially, the police suspected it was a robbery gone wrong. Unfortunately, gas stations are common targets for robberies and criminals looking to score some quick cash. But the more detectives studied the crime scene, the more they suspected it had been staged to look like a robbery. While considering suspects, Gary Krueger's name popped up on the police's radar pretty quickly. By that point in his life, he was a struggling real estate agent just trying to make ends meet each month. But there was never any evidence linking him to Terry Dolan's murder, so he was never arrested or charged. Then there was Jim Barry. In 1984, a Bellevue attorney named Jim Barry stayed late at his office, preparing for an upcoming meeting scheduled for the following day. But before leaving for the night, he was stabbed and killed right there in the middle of his office. Although Gary Krueger wasn't initially considered a suspect, the police eventually learned that Jim Barry represented a bank that was involved in collection efforts against Gary Krueger. He had taken a massive loan out, but had fallen way behind on the payments, so the bank was going after him. Then there was Mario Vaccarino. 1 year later, in 1985, a Seattle union boss named Mario Vaccarino was found beaten to death in a bathtub, which has an immediate connection to Mike Emert's case, who was also found in a bathtub. Parmesan cheese had been sprinkled over his body, leading the police to believe the mob was involved. So the theory became that Mario had been killed over the mob's desire to take over the union. Gary Krueger eventually became a suspect in the case after it was discovered that his close friend, Joe Massimino Sr., worked for the union. The two had first met while serving in Vietnam, and Massimino worked under Mario Vaccarino and was worried about being fired. And after Mario Vaccarino was killed, he became the union's new president. Gary Krueger's wife, Betty, even told the police later on that she knew about his involvement in the hit on Mario Vaccarino. But as with Jim Barry and Terry Dolan, the police had no proof of his involvement beyond what his ex-wife said, so he was never arrested or charged. But it had to make you step back and wonder, how does someone have such close connections to at least 3 other murders, not even including Mike? Most of us will go through our entire lives without any connection to a homicide, but this guy has 4 of them. The more and more I think about it, the more I think he was a professional hitman. When it comes to Mike's murder, Gary Krueger seems to check off all the boxes as far as suspects go. His DNA was found inside his car after the murder. He's been a suspect in at least 3 others. And if the police are correct about this being a professional hit, then Gary might just be the guy. But that still leaves so many unanswered questions. Because Gary Krueger died before the DNA match was ever made, detectives never had the chance to sit down and ask him about Mike's murder. If he was responsible, they'll never know why he did it, who may have hired him, or whether anyone else was involved. It's hard not to wonder what might have happened had his DNA been collected and processed years earlier, as it was supposed to be. Had that comparison been made before his death, investigators may have had the opportunity to confront him while he was still alive, and perhaps finally learn the motive behind one of Washington's most baffling murders. It's now been more than a decade since forensic testing uncovered a connection between Mike Emert and Gary Krueger. But beyond the small traces of evidence recovered from Mike's vehicle, investigators have uncovered little else that explains why Mike was targeted. If Gary Krueger was the man who carried out the murder, then the person who may have hired him has never been identified. And if Gary wasn't acting alone, any answers he had likely died with him beneath the waters of Lake Washington. More than 25 years later, Mike's murder remains officially unsolved. The forensic evidence may have answered one important question, but it also raised countless others. Who wanted Mike dead? Why was he chosen? And was this really the work of a professional hitman? Or is there still a piece of this puzzle investigators have yet to uncover? Until those questions are answered, Mike's family is still waiting for the justice they were promised all those years ago. To share your thoughts on the murder of Mike Emert, be sure to follow us on social media at Forensic Tales. And if you want to listen to new episodes early and ad-free, consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/forensictales. You can get early ad-free access to new episodes and monthly full-length bonus episodes for as little as $3 a month. Your support on Patreon directly helps to fund the show's production, research, and editing costs. And as an independent, one-woman podcast, your support truly helps to keep this show going. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/forensictales. Thank you so much to this week's newest Patreon supporters, Ellen and Barry. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.